There are all of these amazing people out there who are just saying, hey, look what I did with my kids. And, that kind of dispels the skepticism, because it's so easy to underestimate kindergartners, but it's also easy to put too much pressure on kindergartners.
Hi, I'm Ron Sprumberg, co-founder and CEO of Hi Mama. Welcome to our podcast about all things early childhood education.
Vicki, welcome to the Preschool podcast.
Glad to be here, Ron.
So, Vicki, you have a blog. Your blog's called The Cool Cat Teacher Blog. Tell us what that's all about.
Well, I started blogging about 11 years ago as a newbie, and just my exploration, both as a teacher and IT director. So I'm IT director at a school for K through 12. But then I teach upper level grades, although I work with all of the different grades. So I just try to share my learning journey and things that work and are helpful.
Okay, great. What are some of the topics that you focus on?
Education technology is there a lot, but inspiring teachers to do the right thing for kids. So my blog is really born out of love and affection for children. I want every child to have a motivated, excited, inspired teacher. And so much of what we do as teachers is our attitude. But, it is so hard. I mean, I just think about kindergarten teachers and, they're on the floor and they're down there with the kids, and sometimes it can feel like everybody just wants things from you, but the greatest software ever invented is the human brain. So how do we stay motivated and stay encouraged so that we can bring our very best every single day?
100%. Very good point. Attitude, super important. One of the things that I noticed looking at your blog that you've wrote about a fair bit is something that's a pretty hot topic right now, which is social emotional learning. And in particular, in early childhood education, this is a very important subject. Can you tell us just what social emotional learning is and why it's important?
Well, a couple of researchers, Elias in 1997 and Payton in 2000, said that those competent in SEL can recognize and manage their emotions, establish healthy relationships, set positive goals, meet personal and social needs, and make responsible and ethical decisions. Now, that sounds pretty overwhelming, especially for kindergartners, but, understanding how to relate to others is so important. And if we define our curriculum by content and we leave out social emotional learning, we're really leaving out a lot of what we're supposed to be teaching. And I think that the reason it is such a hot button is that we've kind of, the pendulum swings. And in many ways, we have swung too much in the direction of standards and content. And I'm not going to say we've forgotten, but I guess the time for social emotional learning aspects has kind of been squeezed out. And so we have a lot of kids maybe who haven't been taught and instructed, like maybe hopefully many of us were, about how to get along with Johnny when he pulls your hair, or how to get along with Susie when she's mean to you. We need to know how to get along with each other and how to interact in healthy ways.
Yeah, and when you explain it that way, it's, emotions, relationships, goals, and decisions. These are the types of things when I think about my day as a husband, as a father, as an employer, as a colleague. Like, these are the things that drive what I do on a day-to-day basis, not necessarily knowing, random facts or content, as you said. So it makes so much sense. And how are programs implementing social emotional learning into their curriculum? Are you seeing some evidence of that happening more and more?
There are a lot of discussions that are happening, especially here in the United States, with ESSA and how states can define, their measures of success. But I really think that schools need to have conversations about what does SEL mean to us. The thing with any buzzword is you get a lot of people jumping on the bandwagon, and sometimes the bandwagon jumpers aren't really qualified or are using a buzzword but don't belong on the bandwagon. They just jumped on. So I think that really defining what do we want our students to be able to do, Is teamwork important? I mean, of course you think it is, but we need to just clearly define, what are the social emotional skills that we want to be part? Because here's the thing, it has to be school wide. If you have, and we used to kind of do this with character education, where the whole school was talking about integrity, or the whole school was talking about kindness, or justice, or whatever they were talking about, the whole school would talk about it. So the principal would reinforce it when someone came to his office, and all the teachers would enforce it. And I think by kind of bringing it on the front burner and having conversations, schools can get back to saying, okay, let's talk about what these things are. For example, I'll tell you that many teenagers today, if I use the word modesty, don't know what it means. They don't know what humility means. Now, those are not words that you are necessarily going to use with kindergartners, but, they should understand kindness and teamwork and sharing. And these are all things that so many kindergarten teachers are great at doing. But could you imagine if everyone in the lunchroom and everybody throughout the educational organization really was speaking from the same playbook? It makes less confusion. If one person calls it integrity and the other person calls it honesty, young kids are so literal that we kind of need to be using the same terminology. Or, you might even say we want to talk about telling the truth. It's all the same thing, but those different words can really confuse, particularly kids who are just learning how to acquire language and don't really understand all the words.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And talking about buzzwords, I'm going to throw out another one. There's another thing that people talk about quite a bit: STEM or STEAM, science, technology, engineering. Some people put art in there as well, and math. And sometimes we're drawing connections between this content side and SEL. From your perspective, what do you see as the connection between STEAM and social emotional learning?
This is a very interesting question. I think that, especially with young children, I think that there is a real pushback with over standardization because, young children really need time to play. They need time to tinker. So I think that in computer science and STEAM, that young children need a lot of materials and resources to play with. And they may choose to play with someone else, or they may choose to play by themselves. But learning how to relate to others as they create and as they invent and as they work together, that's just really important. So anytime you have students interacting, you have the opportunity to integrate social emotional learning. Sometimes you don't need a ton of technology. One of my favorite people I've interviewed on my own podcast is a lady named Karen McCallum, who is a first grade teacher, and she uses puppets to teach social emotional learning. So when she has two little puppets, a little boy and a little girl, and the little boy is always getting in trouble and the little girl is always correcting him. And the little puppets will do a role play about how do we act in the library, or how do we go on a field trip. And they're kind of modeling how we interact and what we do. So yes, we can use STEAM and STEM, but I also think that this arts and this creativity, there's so many great examples. The other thing to remember is, a lot of young children are using iPads and Chromebooks. And Dr. Michelle Zimmerman has done some research with older kids and found that just because you teach two kids how to interact in the face-to-face world does not mean that they know how to interact in a virtual or an online world. So you have those young kids in Seesaw, you have to teach them how to interact in Seesaw. So any new horizon of interaction is a place where we have to talk about how to socialize, relate, and connect and learn together.
Yeah, it's a good point. So those really cross over each other, right? And you can have, lessons and activities and curriculum where you're covering off various elements of STEAM, but also incorporating social emotional learning. Your Seesaw example is a perfect one where you're using technology, but also learning how to interact with other people on the platform. So it's a great example. Okay, changing subjects a little bit here. You were recently named in Forbes as a top 5 edupreneur to follow. And that's kind of an interesting term, edupreneur. And I just wanted to explore that a little more with you. What do you think defines an edupreneur?
Well, many years ago, I'm pretty sure I coined the term teacherpreneur. And at that time, I really meant that a teacherpreneur was somebody who, kind of like an entrepreneur would create experiences for kids. They would have accountability, but they would be given freedom to really create these experiences and these projects and all kinds of things, experiences for kids. And, they might relate with a business or, do some work with the zoo or that sort of thing. But the way I think that Forbes is kind of meaning it in a way a lot of people are starting to is that educators who are somewhat entrepreneurs. So I teach all day long and I direct all day long, but then at night I have my podcast and my blog, and then I travel and speak some and write some books and that sort of thing. And that is a whole business in itself. I mean, in many ways, it's bigger than my day job, but I couldn't do it well without teaching. So I guess that's kind of why they call it an edupreneur, but it's just this group of people who are educators who are kind of, I don't know if you want to say building a brand, but it's all about the influencers. So they're just kind of, I guess, education influencers that kind of have things happening around what they're doing.
What motivated you to do it? I mean, you had, like you said, a day job where you are a teacher, you're IT director, you're obviously very busy. Why did you want to spend your time outside of work doing entrepreneurial activities related to education?
I didn't really plan it this way. So in 2005, I was at the Georgia Association of Educators Technology Conference, and I was learning about all of these Web 2.0 tools, blogs, wikis, podcasts, all of these things that were out there. And I was really feeling like a failure because my goal for my students is one simple thing. I want them to be world class. And I knew if I wasn't doing all these things that I was not world class. So I actually felt like a complete failure. And I was at my hotel room overnight. It was a 3-day conference. So I was there for all the days. And I was actually praying. I'm like, what on earth? And I decided, you know what? I really felt the calling to blog. I can't really explain it except for that. And so I started blogging and writing, and I knew I couldn't write as an expert. So I decided to write as a beginner or a newbie. So, I learned this or I learned that. And really, I still write as a beginner because I'm learning so much. And that was 11 years ago. And suddenly, I remember my first 2 or 3 months, I had like 7 people read. We used to use this old thing called blog lines, and you could tell how many people were reading your stuff because you had to use an RSS reader for it. And it was like these 7 people were reading my stuff, and I was so excited because it was like, somebody in the world is finding this helpful. And then it was more, and then it was more, and it's like, oh my goodness. So, I'm really an example because I live in a small town of 5,500. I'm in a small school of a little over 300 kids, but I'm really an example of what social media has done because teachers can pick who they want to listen to in the world. They can choose. They no longer have to be listening to and reading the stuff the big publishers send their way or the big speakers bureau sends their way. They can do what they want to do with their time and their attention. And so many teachers are building their PLNs. So I'm really kind of part of a personal learning network of many, and many of teachers are part of my personal learning network. So I kind of feel like I'm the poster child for the classroom teacher who loves teaching because, we are the media now. You're the media. I'm the media. And we don't need permission to publish anymore. We can talk about our amazing profession and be encouraging and just get past the mainstream media who only wants to talk about us when we sleep with a student, and that's ridiculous because there are amazing stories every single day of teachers. And, in the last couple of years, I've really shifted away from what I do to really putting a spotlight on other teachers. So a lot of my blog posts and podcast episodes now are pretty much on everybody else and all the things they're doing. And I'll bring my stuff in a little bit. But there's so much awesomeness out there in education, and I really hope that it improves education by helping more people tell their story.
That's a really awesome story. And I think it really should resonate with our audience because, again, what we're trying to do with the Preschool podcast is inspire early childhood educators to really make a difference and lead change in what they do. And the fact that you're coming from a small town of, 5,000 or 6,000 people, and you've got this blog that has, a huge following is just a really perfect example of someone who's just taken something that they didn't know much about with technology and blogging, and you just took it on and you worked on it over time, and now you've got an audience and you're sharing other people's stories in the community. So it's really, really awesome. So thank you for doing that. Cool. So now I know a little bit more about what an edupreneur is. And I've spoken here just a little bit about inspiring early childhood educators. So from your perspective, what do you think about early childhood educators building a personal brand or becoming edupreneurs? Because I think we're seeing it probably more from teachers that teach at the grade school level or middle school level. What about early childhood educators or preschool teachers?
Oh, well, interestingly, the ISTE organization, International Society for Technology Educators, gives the K. Bitter Award. And that's kind of where I look for some of the most amazing kindergarten teachers. People like Karen Lehrman, Maria Nee have won that award and in some ways become kindergarten teacher rock star type people. But there's also a massive community around Kinder Chat on Twitter and First Chat and Second Chat and all of these Twitter chats. There's these whole groups of people like Christine Pinto, who has kindergartners. She does GAFE for Littles, GAFE for Littles, and they're using Chromebooks and making web pages in kindergarten. So, there are all of these amazing people out there who are just saying, hey, look what I did with my kids. And, that kind of dispels the skepticism, because it's so easy to underestimate kindergartners, but it's also easy to put too much pressure on kindergartners. I mean, the thing with young children is that when kids get older, a 2-month difference is just not as much as a 2-month age difference in kindergarten.
Right.
I mean, kindergarten, it's a massive developmental difference. And so you really have to personalize and customize things to those children and be sensitive to them. So anyway, they're just amazing people out there. And I would just encourage all of your listeners to build a PLN and to connect with others and to remember that it's not about a following. I was talking to my students today about presenting, and I told them about my first time presenting at the GAETC, Georgia Association of Educators Technology Conference that really got me started. And I was so excited because I had 3 people in the room. And one of the kids said, well, how did you feel that you had 3 people in the room? I was like, I was thrilled because I was going to give everything I had to those 3 people. And it turns out one of those 3 was a conference organizer and booked me for my first conference. Oh. But, I keynoted GAETC last year for I don't know how many thousand educators. But, if you're helpful to one person, if you want to be an edupreneur, if you want to be a leader, it's about being helpful, being encouraging, and be the kind of person that your profession needs. And have integrity and be careful when people come bearing gifts, because sometimes those gifts have big strings attached. So just, be careful, but also have integrity. And remember, it's about the children.
Yeah, it's a good message to really stick to your story and what you genuinely want to talk about and conversations you want to have, and the following will come if that's what people are interested in, and you'll speak most passionately about it, right?
Yeah, and being consistent. Most people give up before they have any chance of getting a following. When you have a podcast, you really can't look at your results until you get to 100 episodes. Well, most people, the average podcast, has somewhere between 10 and 20 episodes. I know my first podcast, I had over 300. And now this one, I think I had 170 something just went up today. So you have to be consistent. And how many times are you going to blog a week? And at first, building that consistency is hard. It does get easier over time. There's the 10,000 hour rule that Malcolm Gladwell talks about in Outliers, that once you've done something for 10,000 hours, you really become much more proficient at it and world class, and you can be an expert at it. And it does get easier now for me to blog and to do things, but I still make mistakes and still have to make sacrifices. But, there are a lot of people who say, Vicki, I want to do what you're doing. And I say, no, you don't. Do you really want to get up at 5 a.m. and do you really want to do this stuff in the evenings? And now if you're called to it, you can't help it. Like nobody could stop me. It's just because I have this huge, immense calling on my life, that part of my ministry, I just view it as a ministry, is to encourage and empower educators to have remarkable classrooms every day and to be remarkable people themselves. Because, an amazing educator, they have the ability to be completely transformational and live a true life of richness and a legacy that few professions can give you.
Yeah, that's awesome. And also, a really good point about, there's no overnight success, right? Like you had to work really hard to get to where you are. And it's a really great story. And I want to wrap things up with one more question for you. You're blogging about a lot of different topics, and you're very exposed to conversations that are happening about education, technology and education. What's exciting you most about education right now and trends in education?
What is exciting me most? Oh, that's a hard question, because it could excite me if we saw some states in the United States doing some brave things with the redefinition of standards. But I think right now, I don't know if we're seeing that yet. It could be. I guess I'm most excited about the potential we have for doing some really great things. I don't know if people are brave enough. I hope they are. I hope people are brave enough to shake up the status quo, because here's the thing that really worries me about today's in our society. We try to label people and put them in a box, and I'll have them to send on my blog sometime. And I'm really work very hard and to be nonpartisan in everything, because I'm not going to do politics. I focus on teaching in the classroom. But every so often, I'll have people from different political parties who try to slap a label on me, and they'll get very, very angry about this or that. And many years ago, I worked for Sam Nunn in Washington, D.C., and the thing I liked about him was that he voted on issues. He didn't necessarily vote party lines. And it's really hard to be that kind of person these days. But we need people who can work with people of all walks of life, because I think it's actually very hard to truly understand a person. We can't label people and say, oh, you're that type, or you think this, or this is your philosophy on early childhood education, and really understand it. I think that we have to look at circumstances individually. I think that if we could get back to individualization, focusing on the individual child, realizing that when we close that classroom door, we have a whole lot of influence. Probably 98% of what happens in that classroom comes from us as the teacher. So I guess I'm most excited that if classroom teachers could truly understand that potential that they have, then we have the ability to change the world. I'm also excited that I think that in kindergarten in particular, that people are starting to back off on those rigid standards. I mean, several years back, I was meeting with somebody kind of high up in the Common Core movement, and I said, listen, I think that Common Core is going to be doomed if you don't back off on these kindergarten standards, because they are ludicrous. They are putting too much pressure on children, and it's just not right. And I think that people are kind of backing up a little bit and saying, you know what? The children need to play. Yeah. I mean, they need time to play. So for kindergarten perspective, that really excites me, that I think that people will get back to some of what they need. I mean, the tough thing about education is we seem to have pendulum swings. Like, can't we hold in the middle? Can't we have some standards, some basic standards and play? Yeah. Does it have to be all play or all standards? Why can't we be rational? So, but I do think some kindergarten teachers who are losing heart are deciding to stay after all in the profession or getting back in the profession. So that's encouraging too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, it's a very inspiring story, Vicky, you know, coming from a small town and building a big following and having your own blog and being called a top 5 edupreneur by Forbes. And to me, I think a couple of the really great messages from you. One is, as early childhood educators, challenging ourselves to be world class, like you, Vicky. I think that's a really great message. And also, I really like your quote. I want to quote you on this again at some point, maybe being brave enough to shake up the status quo. And again, like we need people who are going to be leaders and challenge the status quo if you think things should be different, and that's going to result in better outcomes for children. It's been an awesome episode, Vicky. If people want to get in touch with you or learn more about your work, where should they go?
Coolcatteacher.com, and everything is there. They can subscribe to my newsletter. I send lots of information out, and yeah, just connect or tweet me at CoolCatTeacher.
Wicked. Thanks, Vicky.
If you enjoyed our conversation, don't forget to subscribe for more episodes and leave a review. The Preschool Podcast is brought to you by Hi Mama. If you're anything like the thousands of teachers listening to the Preschool Podcast, you know how long it takes to fill out daily sheets, child portfolios, and lesson plans. And that's where Hi Mama saves the day. With an easy-to-use interface built by teachers for teachers, Hi Mama can cut the time you spend on documentation and parent engagement in half. Create and send beautiful daily sheets, photos, videos, and messages to parents in seconds, saving you time in your busy day. Podcast listeners can get a free tour with one of our community advisors. Go to himama.com